Hello and welcome to OKellyChemistry.com. I'm Ivana O'Kelly and thanks for joining me. In this video I'm going to go through nomenclature. So I'm going to show you how to write the chemical formula and how to name different types of compounds. So the two types of compounds I'm going to focus on are ionic compounds and covalent compounds. Now with an ionic compound we know that it is a metal bonded to a non-metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up with an S block metal, meaning group 1 and 2, bonded with a P block. And then we're going to look at our D block metals bonded to a P block non-metal. And then for covalent, we're going to be focusing on what happens when we put a P with a P. Now please remember that hydrogen, even though it's in group 1, it's not an alkali metal. So it's going to actually be a non-metal, so it's going to be classified as a P block in this situation. So grab your periodic table and let's get through this. So here's a summary chart for what's in a name. So again, ionic is a metal bonded to a non-metal, or we can have a metal bonded to a polyatomic ion. So remember, polyatomic ions for the most part will end in ate or ite when we're talking about them bonded to oxygen. And your teacher should give you a reference chart with the polyatomic ions on it. And then for our covalent compounds, we're talking about the bonding of two non-metals together. Obviously, you know that in an ionic compound, the valence electron from the metal is completely transferred over to the non-metal. And then in a covalent compound, the valence electrons are shared between the atoms. So here I have a mixed bunch of compounds, so a mixture of names and compounds. And what I found is that most students, when you learn these in isolation, absolutely wonderful. But then when you see them all mixed up together, that's where it becomes challenging. So what I'm going to do is we're going to identify which part of our compound is from the S, which is from the D, which is from the P, and which is a polyatomic ion. So let's go ahead through each of these compounds and color code them. So our first up, we're going to identify the S's. And our first S on the left-hand side is going to be strontium. So obviously, I encourage you to have your periodic table open when you're doing this. Next is magnesium. Over on the right-hand side, sodium is an S block metal. And I'm also including aluminum, as I said, as an S block metal, in that it has a set number of valence electrons. Next are our D block metals. So in terms of valence electrons, we know that our D block metals don't have a set number of valence electrons. They can change. So let's find some Ds. And again, you're looking at the first element or you're looking at the first name that's given. So CO is cobalt, and that is a D block metal, along with scandium, Sc. Over here on the right-hand side, if you see a name of a metal that has a Roman numeral after it, that's how we write our charges for a D block metal. Next will be our non-metals. So both sulfur and oxygen are from the P block. Next we have oxygen, followed by nitrogen. SO4 is a polyatomic ion. Oxygen is a P. Both nitrogen and hydrogen are non-metals. And then chloride is coming from chlorine. So that means what's left are our polyatomic ions. So SO4 is a polyatomic ion and nitrate is a polyatomic ion. So let's go ahead and name these. So our first one is chromium oxide, but we need to go ahead and determine what is the charge for our chromium. So we're going to be using the charge of our non-metal to determine the charge of our metal. So oxygen we know has a 2- charge. We have one of each, therefore cobalt has to be 2 positive. So we'll go ahead and write down the Roman numeral 2 in parentheses after our chromium. Next, SO2. So we are talking about a molecular compound, and this is where we use prefixes to represent the number of atoms of each compound. SRO, we'll write down the name of our metal. Our non-metal changes to IDE. Next, we have SCN, so that's scandium nitride. So we need to determine what is the charge for scandium. Well, nitrogen has a 3- charge. We have one of those, so scandium must be 3 positive. So we'll put Roman numeral 3 into our parentheses. Next is magnesium sulfate. Again, that's a metal with a polyatomic ion. Moving over to our right-hand side, we have Na2O. Again, when you have to determine the formula, you're using the charges, you're making them equal to 0. Nitrogen trihydride, we're using our prefixes, so NH3. Next up, nickel 1 nitrate. So nitrate, you need to know that that's a polyatomic ion. Again, ATE bonded to a nonmetal is a polyatomic ion. You must know the charge, so it's a -1. And lastly, I have aluminum with chlorine, so AlCl3. So short and sweet little video for you guys, but hopefully this will help with determining if you get a mixture of all different types of compounds. Easiest way is break them down by S and D. So again, we're putting an S with a D block with a P block metal, and then we're putting a D with a P. So hopefully you like this video. If you do, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.